Hi, welcome to Astrology Basics. Today, I wanted to talk to you about something I mentioned last week, which is planets that are in dignity, detriment, exaltation, or fall. You have this sheet in your workbook under Astrology Basics. And basically here are all of the planets. What you will not see here is Chiron or Black Moon. But for Chiron, you can assume it's the same thing as Mercury, which is Gemini and Virgo here. And for Black Moon, you can assume it's the same thing as Pluto or Scorpio. So those will be the only two sort of asterisks. So what does it mean in your chart? And I'll share a chart in a moment. I mentioned this last week. When you have a planet that's in a dignity, what it means is in its ruler. So for instance, I have a moon in Cancer. The moon rules Cancer. Mercury rules Gemini. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. Mars rules Aries. The old ruler is Scorpio. Those placements in your chart are heightened. That means that that planet likes where it is placed by sign. Doesn't mean by house, but by sign, that planet feels at home. So imagine the dignity being ownership, or saying, this is my place, this is my home. So it's going to be in the person's chart, your chart or your client's chart. It's going to be a place that has like a little oomph, and that planet works really well there. Now, take into account that even though Mars might be in Capricorn, if it's in the 12th, then of course the layer of the 12th house, bottom of the ocean, inability to sort of rise out of that and be seen, or spin its wheels, or use that Mars energy to create, could be a detriment. But we're just talking about the planet over here and then the sign. So first, let's go through the dignities. Sun is Leo. So if the sun is in Leo, for instance, it would be in a dignity. So all Leos would have that. Moon in Cancer. So Mercury is in Gemini and or Virgo. So now the new ruler of Virgo is Chiron. So you could put this here, Mercury or Chiron would live out the dignity in Gemini or Virgo. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. Mars rules Aries. The new ruler of Scorpio is Pluto, but we do still give it credence when Mars is in Scorpio as a very good placement. Jupiter in Sagittarius, Saturn in Capricorn, Uranus in Aquarius, Neptune in Pisces, which is what this generation has now, and then Pluto in Scorpio. So this is the dignity. It just feels at home. There's no special extra value, but it's a good placement to have because the placement is at home. Next is detriment. The detriment is going to be the opposite of the dignity. This is where the planet does not feel welcome. It feels almost rejected in that sign. So let's just use Sun, for instance, in Aquarius. If Sun dignity is Leo, the opposite sign of Leo is Aquarius. The Sun doesn't like Aquarius. Why would that be? If the Sun is solar, if the Sun is unity, if the Sun is individuation, and Aquarius is a sign of the collective, the Sun is not going to like to be in a sign that has a group collective feeling, because the Sun is about the solar aspect, the me, or the ego, or the identity. So that's where you start to see detriment. Similarly is the fall. Detriment and fall, you can say, are pretty similar. They do not like or thrive that sign, and that planet, for instance, in that sign. So Aquarius is collective as well as Libra. You could even take this a step further. If the Sun is in the 11th or the Sun is in the 7th, it is a Sun that's supposed to be an individuation aspect that is now layered on with a collective sort of tattoo or energy. And so those people, for instance, Sun in the 11th or Sun in the 7th, to go with the Aquarius and the Libra in detriment and fall, might feel that in order to be standing out in the group, they need to work a little harder, or the only way to stand out is to have an impact or hierarchy within the group setting. For Libra, for instance, or the Sun in the 7th, it would be the Sun in the house of others. How do I shine in the house that has to do with marriage or close friends? I don't know how to find my own space or footing in a house that is a collective or the house of others. So you could start to understand why the detriment and the fall are exactly not well placed. And the same layer you can bring to the house that rules Aquarius, for instance, the 11th, or Libra, the 7th. And then the last space is the exaltation. The exaltation is a step above the dignity. The dignity is where I feel at home, my home address. But think of exaltation, your best friend's house, your grandparents' house, someplace where you feel not only at home, but now you're catered to, you feel special. So you have the sun is in Aries, the moon is in Taurus, Mercury in Virgo, Venus in Pisces, Mars in Capricorn. So I happen to have Venus in Pisces and Mars in Capricorn. So I'll use my chart in a minute. So these are placements that are like extra special, where they go overdrive or overtime to work for you or your client. So anything obviously that's an exaltation is going to be something that the client will use excessively, maybe for their identity, for instance, a Mars, or for their ability to be compassionate or loving, Venus in Pisces, for instance. So there's an added effect or like an extra bonus to that planet and that sign wherever it is. Now, again, remember the house placement. The house placement might take all that specialness or all that feeling of home and, you know, knock it off the table, but it doesn't minimize the fact that a planet is in an exaltation. Same thing with a detriment. You might have, for instance, a sun in Aquarius. However, the sun doesn't dislike being in the 11th house, even though it's technically in detriment. Why? Because the sun can shine light on a group issue. So that's where you start to identify how the client lives out the detriment, the exaltation, the fall, or the dignity. I have a moon in Cancer. It's a dignity, but it's in the house of Scorpio. So it's not approachable, or it has a boundary because it's in a shadow house. It's deeply hidden. So all of that availability of emotion might have to be sought after. So you start to see how the house, the sign, the planet all starts to work together. This chart is basically a memorization thing. I say to go to your chart and see what you have of each placement, so you could start to see where you in particular are living out these things. And then you can go a step further. So I'll just keep saying here about the sun in Aquarius. You do have a sun in the 11th, or a moon in the 10th, or Mercury in the 9th. You see how I'm doing Mercury in Sag, which is the 9th house. And you could start to see how there could be a detriment in that way. And I would recommend charting out your entire chart with this chart and start seeing what placements are maybe going overdrive. So my Mars in Capricorn works overdrive for me. And that means it takes away from other areas in the chart that maybe I need to let that space take over. And then that's the sort of conversation you start to have with yourself or with your client when you start to see. So detriment and fall, as the name says, they don't add things, but rather it's probably a planet that the client or yourself has to work really hard for it to shine. The dignity is a natural home placement, and obviously the best is the exaltation. So let me just show you in my particular chart. So I have an exalted Venus in Pisces in the 3rd. So for instance, this would be my teaching, or my neighbors, or my siblings. And I have a Mars in Capricorn in the 2nd. So in the ability to work, or a strong value system, or be very directed in terms of my work, for instance. So these two placements, they happen to be in a good spot. Venus likes the 3rd and Mars likes the 2nd. So there isn't like a negative, but like I was saying, my moon is the dignity of Cancer, but it's in the 8th house. And yes, it's good that the 8th house is a Scorpio water house. So it does flow literally there, but since the moon is more about availability of emotion and it's in a shadow house, there might be a depth to that needs to be reached before that is sort of exposed, if you will. So you could start to match up your chart and see where things are exalted versus where things are fall, and how you're living them out. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is a little advanced, if you will, because you're not going to really need this so much until a level 3 when we do transits. However, I mentioned it last week, so I wanted to bring it up. This sheet is the speed of planets around the zodiac, and it's also in your Astrology Basics workbook. So every one of the planets, including the nodes, has an amount of time in a sign. So this is when we start to see generational planets. So for instance, if somebody is born in 1999, a portion of that year, for instance, of Virgo, a Venus will be in Virgo. And then that generation, and Venus is 24 to 100 days. So that 100-day period, those people that are born with that Venus in Virgo are going to share that placement. Now, the personal planets are the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. So these go very, very fast. You can see 2 months, 69 days, 100 days. You're really within the range of 2 days, which is the moon, up to 100 days with Venus. Now, planets do go retrograde, and that might add time to how long they're in a sign. So that's why Venus here says 24 to 100 days, or Mercury, we know Mercury retrogrades 3 times in a year, 15 to 69 days. So that's why there is a range. But for the most part, these personal planets, 1 month, 2 months, 80 days, that's about the average, okay? So you see this here. This is the time it takes to go around the entire zodiac. That means through all 12 signs. The sun, obviously 1 year, it goes through all 12 signs in a year. The moon, all 12 signs within 28, 29 days. Mercury through all 12 signs in a year. Venus, all 12 signs in a year. Mars, 2 years. That's where we get the concept of the terrible twos. By the time the child is 2 years old, they've gone around the entire zodiac and they've tried on all the archetypes, so to speak. And then we go into the interpersonal or the outer planets: Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. These will be the extension of a year in each sign. Saturn is about 2.5 years in each sign. Chiron, 3 to 5 years in each sign. So last week I was talking about having Chiron in Aries. So the people of my generation, within that 3 to 5 year stretch, we all have Chiron in Aries. So we're going to have a familiarity in terms of our wound, in terms of seeking an identity, because that's what Chiron in Aries means. Then you're going to go to Chiron in Taurus. Those people might be bracing more issues with money or self-worth through their body or illness or physical issues. So you start to see how generations are formed from these outer planets. So somebody can have a personal planet in any number of signs, but the outer planets, the Jupiter to Pluto, is really going to define the generation, because those people are going to have a lot of similarity. Now, what will vary would be the house in which they have the signs, or the planets, I'm sorry, and the house and the aspects. And we'll see that in level 2. When are they talking positively, like a trine or a sextile, or are they hard aspects that are negative inner dialogue, like squares and quincunxes? So that's what we'll start to see, the individuality of each of the people within a generation. But the generational sort of highlights are viewed in these planets. So for instance, my generation, Jupiter in Aquarius. And so every 12 years, Jupiter goes around. So I know that 12 years from my birth, every 12 years, Jupiter will be in Aquarius. You're eventually going to learn this, and this is going to be sort of second nature. Saturn is every 28 to 30 years. It goes around the entire zodiac. Chiron takes actually 48 to 52 years, 50 on average. Uranus takes 84 years to go around the entire zodiac. Neptune and Pluto, you will never see fully in an entire cycle in your lifetime, 165 years and 250 or 260 years. The nodes are about 18 to 20 years. When we start doing transits, you're going to see where this is really important. But these 2 pieces of information, the dignities, the falls, the detriments, the exaltations, and the speed, is foundational information that you will then apply when you do transits. So I highly recommend that these 2 pieces of information you kind of start studying and memorizing and tucking away, and the crosses. I've mentioned that before. So let me just kind of show you, since we are in some transits that are kind of going full circle. So here's Uranus. Uranus is in Taurus, and Uranus will be in Taurus in this generation for 7 years. It's at 14 degrees, so it's midway. It's about going to be to 29 or 30 degrees. So we're about midway. So we must be around 3.5 years into this Uranus cycle. You're going to just start to know this on autopilot. And Pluto, however, is 12 to 24 years. It's only at 28 degrees right now. So there's about 2-3 years left in Capricorn. And then it starts the next 12 to 24 years in Aquarius. Saturn is in Aquarius, and it'll be there until the end of the year. And then it will move into Pisces. Mars is at 13 degrees. It's at midpoint. So it's got about another month in Pisces. And you start to see this is what activates people to take charge, to make a change, to divorce, to marry, to have a baby, to move cross country, to go back to school. It's these aspects here as the planets move. So eventually you want to know what of these big planets are in what signs, because they're going to be activating aspects of your chart. But again, that's later on. But for now, start to study those 2 documents that are in your astrology basics. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send an email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Have a great day.